He thought it would be just another easy takedown. A homeless man, a public sidewalk, and a cop with something to prove. But what Officer Kane didn't know was that someone powerful was watching. And this time, the badge wouldn't protect him. It was a gray, wind-laced Wednesday morning in downtown St. Louis. The streets buzzed with activity as office workers rushed to beat the clock, the clatter of shoes echoing off concrete buildings. City Hall stood like a fortress of civic pride, flags waving, polished granite stairs leading to grand double doors. But just to the side of all that grandeur, on the cold pavement near a city planter, lay Curtis. Curtis was a 58-year-old Navy veteran with sun-leathered skin and quiet, observant eyes. His once athletic frame had shrunk from years of hardship. His body bore the invisible scars of a life interrupted, not by crime or laziness, but by a failing health system and economic freefall. After suffering a stroke in his early 50s, Curtis had lost everything: his job at the Department of Transportation, his apartment, and eventually, the will to ask for help. He now slept near buildings he once worked in, using his worn backpack as a pillow and his hoodie as armor against the world. On this particular morning, Curtis wasn't panhandling. He wasn't asking for change or bothering anyone. He was just sitting, legs stretched out, arms folded tightly around his chest. He had learned long ago that people were more comfortable ignoring the silent than confronting the desperate. But not everyone ignored him. From his police cruiser parked down the block, Officer Bradley Kane sipped bitter gas station coffee and squinted at the man near the City Hall steps. Kane didn't recognize Curtis, or if he did, he didn't care. In his eyes, Curtis was another vagrant lowering the image of the city. To Kane, perception mattered more than context. "The mayor doesn't want this crap on her doorstep," he once told a rookie during a similar encounter. Out of sight, out of mind. Kane was known among his peers for taking initiative. He boasted a file of commendations, but also a growing whisper of citizen complaints. He had a way of walking up to a situation and inflaming it, not because it needed escalation, but because he wanted control. And this morning, he saw an opportunity to display it. He exited his vehicle with exaggerated urgency and marched toward Curtis, radio clipped to his vest, hand already resting near his holster. The slap of his boots against the pavement made heads turn. "You can't be here," he said sharply. Curtis opened his eyes slowly. He hadn't heard Kane's approach. His voice, hoarse from the morning air, barely carried. "Just resting. My legs hurt." "This is city property," Kane snapped. "Move along." Curtis sat up a bit. "I used to work for the city," he said, trying to offer something. A reason, a connection, a shred of dignity. Kane didn't bite. "You can reminisce somewhere else," he said with mock politeness. "You've got 60 seconds before I start calling this in." Curtis hesitated. Standing up wasn't easy. His limbs were stiff, his knees swollen. But before he could push himself upright, Kane had already stepped back and spoke into his radio. "Dispatch, I've got a 10 to 28. Possible transient, not compliant. May have prior drug history." The words echoed like thunder through Curtis's chest. He hadn't touched drugs in decades. He'd passed every city employment screen. But none of that mattered now. Within minutes, Kane was rifling through Curtis's belongings. A battered novel, a sleeping bag, a photo of a young boy, his nephew now grown. Kane tossed them one by one into a nearby trash bin. "Maybe if you showered once a week, you'd smell less like a dumpster fire," he sneered. A few passers-by chuckled. Most turned their heads. Curtis said nothing. Because what could he say? What could anyone say when their very existence was treated like a nuisance? The humiliation was complete. And Curtis, whose only crime was trying to rest his legs on the sidewalk of a city he once served, sat in silence, the weight of shame heavier than his backpack. But what Officer Kane didn't realize, someone upstairs was watching from the 5th floor of City Hall, behind a wall of thick glass, tinted to block the morning glare. Mayor Denise Holloway stood frozen, coffee mug in hand, watching the scene unfold. Her day had started like any other, back-to-back meetings, briefings about budget issues, community safety updates. She'd taken a moment to breathe before her next appointment, stepping to the window to glance out at the plaza below. It was habit more than anything, a few quiet seconds to gather her thoughts. But what she saw below stopped her cold. She recognized the officer, Bradley Kane. His name had surfaced before, attached to minor complaints from citizens about his tone, his temper, his tendency to escalate where de-escalation was warranted. Nothing egregious enough to warrant suspension, but enough to make her uneasy. And now she saw him in action, barking at a man who barely stirred. Then her eyes narrowed. That man on the sidewalk. He wasn't just a stranger. Curtis. It took her a few seconds to place him. Thinner now. Grayer. But it was him. Back when she was still Councilwoman Holloway, Curtis had been a part-time employee with the city's Department of Transportation. He wasn't just an employee. He was an active, warm presence who volunteered to canvass neighborhoods during her first campaign. She remembered him holding clipboards at neighborhood block parties, remembered his jokes, his kindness. He'd even gifted her a handmade wooden pen when she'd won her election. Use it to sign good things, he'd said with a smile. She hadn't seen him since. When his name came up years ago in city memos about layoffs due to medical leave, she hadn't realized things had gotten so bad. Now, watching him get humiliated on the steps of the very institution he once served, her stomach turned. Kane was already calling in backup, already rummaging through Curtis's few belongings like they were trash. Then he laughed while tossing a rolled-up sleeping bag into the garbage. Mayor Holloway didn't even realize she'd set her coffee down. Her fingers tightened into fists. She didn't call for her security detail. She didn't ask for someone else to handle it. She headed straight for the elevator. Her heels clicked sharply against the tile as she descended. Her aide saw the look on her face and knew better than to follow. The elevator seemed to move painfully slow, but when the doors opened, she strode across the marble lobby like a storm. Outside, Kane had started cuffing Curtis, relishing his control over the moment. A few more people had gathered on the sidewalk, watching silently, uneasily. Some filmed with phones, unsure if they were witnessing something illegal, or just something cruel. Officer Kane. Holloway's voice rang out, cutting through the scene like a blade. Remove those cuffs. Immediately. Kane turned, frowning. He hadn't heard her approach. Ma'am, I'm in the middle of... You're in the middle of violating department policy, city code, and basic human decency, she said, voice sharp with authority. Gasps followed. One woman in the crowd whispered, "That's the mayor." Kane's face turned pale. Curtis, still on the ground, blinked up in confusion. He hadn't heard her voice in years. His eyes flicked to hers, then widened in disbelief. "Madam Mayor," he said weakly. Denise Holloway stepped between them, without hesitation. "Curtis," she said gently, kneeling beside him. "I'm so sorry this happened. You're safe now." She turned to Kane. "Get your hands off him. Now." Kane hesitated, but only for a second. He unclipped the cuffs, his expression tight, with shame and panic. The crowd, now larger, was filming every second. The phones didn't miss a thing. Mayor Holloway rose to her feet and faced the public. "Let me be perfectly clear," she said, projecting her voice. "This man is a veteran. He worked for this city. He served his country. And today, he was humiliated in front of his fellow citizens. Not because he was a threat, not because he was breaking the law, but because he was homeless." She let her words settle in the silence. If you wear the city's badge and can't distinguish between danger and desperation, you don't deserve to wear that badge. Kane stood frozen, his career unraveling in real time. The mayor turned back to Curtis, gently helping him sit against the planter. "You're not invisible, Curtis. Not anymore." By noon that same day, the clip was everywhere. The moment Mayor Denise Holloway descended those granite steps, cut through the air like a razor, and demanded Officer Kane uncuff the man on the sidewalk, it had been captured from 3 different angles and uploaded by half a dozen witnesses. Twitter exploded. News outlets picked it up within hours. Local headlines screamed, "Mayor defends homeless veteran from police harassment." One video, viewed over 3 million times in a single night, paused on the exact moment Kane laughed, while tossing Curtis's sleeping bag into the trash. The internet has a way of turning justice into spectacle, and this time, it sided with Curtis. By the end of the day, Officer Kane was placed on administrative leave, pending a full investigation. Mayor Holloway personally ordered a review of his bodycam footage, his complaint history, and patterns in his arrest reports. Internal Affairs found a troubling record: repeated complaints of excessive force, verbal abuse, and misconduct, all dismissed or buried in bureaucracy. But the world wasn't looking away anymore. 3 days later, Kane resigned, not with an apology, not with remorse, but quietly, hoping to escape the firestorm of public opinion. He wouldn't. Meanwhile, Curtis was moved into temporary housing arranged by the mayor's office. It wasn't much, a clean room with a warm bed in a community shelter for veterans, but it was more than a sidewalk, more than cold concrete, more than what he'd had in years. When reporters asked Holloway why she'd stepped in, her response was simple: because he deserved to be treated like a human being. But her actions didn't end there. Within a week, the mayor launched a bold new city initiative, Project Grounded, a program dedicated to identifying homeless veterans and providing immediate access to emergency housing, healthcare screenings, mental health counseling, and job placement resources. It was funded in part by redirecting discretionary police funds into veteran services, a controversial but applauded move. Curtis was the first to enroll. He received a full medical evaluation at the local VA hospital. His blood pressure was high, and his joints showed signs of long-term stress from sleeping on concrete. But he was treatable, and more importantly, hopeful. A city caseworker helped him recover lost documents, his veteran ID, Social Security card, and employment records. He was even offered part-time work helping with maintenance inside the same city hall he once cleaned years ago. But what meant most to Curtis wasn't the job. It was the letter. On city letterhead, signed by the mayor herself, it read, "This city failed you once, but that ends now. Thank you for your service, and for reminding us that silence in the face of injustice is never acceptable." Curtis read it every morning, folding it carefully back into the drawer of his bedside table, like a prayer. Meanwhile, community conversations bloomed across the city. Schools hosted forums on homelessness. Churches organized code drives. A local art gallery launched a photo series titled "The People You Ignore," featuring portraits and stories of those living on the streets. For Curtis, it was overwhelming. He wasn't used to being seen, let alone celebrated. But little by little, he allowed the warmth back in. He started walking with less of a slump in his shoulders, smiling more, talking to people again. One afternoon, he stood outside City Hall, this time not as a victim, but as a guest speaker for a Project Grounded event. Dozens of people gathered. Cameras pointed. Microphones stood tall. He looked out at the crowd and cleared his throat. "I used to think people stopped seeing me because I was homeless," he said, voice trembling slightly. "But the truth is some of them never saw me to begin with." He paused, but someone did, and that changed everything. Applause echoed down the city block, and for the first time in years, Curtis felt tall. He wasn't just a statistic anymore. He wasn't just that guy on the sidewalk. He was a man with a name, a voice, and a second chance. Not because of a system that suddenly started working, but because one person in power chose not to look away. He thought no one cared, that a man with nothing could be treated like garbage. But justice doesn't always come with flashing lights. Sometimes, it walks down the steps in heels and speaks truth to power, because real strength is standing up when the world looks away.